of Mikasa Sukasa on American Freedom Radio. Thank you all so much for being so patient while we're getting everything squared away as usual. I love to see all my people in our YouTube chat room. Shout out to Carolyn Wolf, Zachary White, Tony Garza, Andrew McMillan. Thank you all so much. M. Oss, how are you guys doing? Thanks to everybody who's listening to us on American Freedom Radio. Make sure that if you want to have your comments heard here and or on Roku, that you donate that super chat on YouTube, and we will give you a shout out. We will stop whatever we are talking about to go ahead and shout you out. Also, make sure that you join our conversation on JustNForm.com. Shout out to everybody who's already joined, by the way. There's been a couple of hundred people in the last couple of weeks who've joined JustNForm, and I want to thank you all. Make sure that when you get to JustNForm.com and you get registered, that you add me as a friend. I'll add you back, promise. So, a lot of updates have happened. I think the last show we had was on Wednesday, but there was a lot of things that have happened since then. A lot of breaking news story. A lot of things that have gone. I feel like this entire election fraud scandal or election integrity scandal or lack thereof has kind of gotten out of hand. It's become a little convoluted, and as usual, the establishment is taking full advantage to try and somehow convince the entire country that election integrity is a left or a right issue, that it is exclusively the Democrat or the Republican Party who conducts election fraud or is a victim of said election fraud. When in actuality, it is the people who oftentimes, or every time really, suffer from election fraud, and it is almost every time not conducted by the people, but election fraud is mostly conducted by the establishment in which we are all fighting against. So, brief recap. Oh, first of all, let me just say, I today recorded with Lee Camp of Redacted Tonight, and that show will be airing on TV on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be online available at the Redacted VIP website at 6:30, I believe is what he told me. So definitely go check that out. That is actually my first time being on Redacted Tonight, and Lee is a good friend of mine, and he is actually coming to Miami. In case you have not gotten a ticket and you live in South Florida, if you want to see Lee Camp live, he'll be here on December the 7th and December the 8th, and I will be with him on December the 7th. So make sure you come out and see Lee Camp, and if you're available, you'll be able to. If you are there, you'll see me too. With that being said, yeah, all hell's broken loose in Florida. But what a surprise, right? It seems to me as if Florida has almost turned the elections, or at least election fraud, into a bi-yearly tradition, right? Many of you recall the corrupt elections of 2000, which, by the way, ironically, we're going to talk about a little bit more today. Jeb Bush called for the firing of election supervisor Brenda Snipes, and I'm laughing because he's like, Brenda Snipes has destroyed the confidence in Florida voters' belief that our democracy works. And I'm like, really, Jeb? Really? You think that our confidence in whether or not the elections in Florida are legitimate was destroyed when Brenda Snipes started this? You don't think that you were part of any particular election where any family member of yours, I know you got a couple of family members, so we can narrow it down. Let's just say the one that is a junior. I don't want to say that you have pioneered the lack of confidence we have in Florida's election integrity, but I will say that it did not start with Brenda Snipes. And you, sir, are not that innocent yourself. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But even Jeb Bush has spoken out. Now, it's kind of confusing what's been happening, right? It's kind of confusing because since that video that was taken by one of Tim Canova's volunteers that was put out by myself and Tim Canova the day after the elections. Went viral because it was retweeted by Marco Rubio. Many people would be confused by what exactly has been taking place since that. Why do I say that? Because if you all recall, Andrew Gillum conceded. DeSantis was the victor. Rick Scott actually won, weirdly enough. He won. I'm not saying it's weird because he won. I'm saying it's weird because if you've been paying attention to this story as it unfolds, Rick Scott has been one of the loudest. He's been one of the loudest when it comes to pretty much calling out Brenda Snipes, saying that not saying that he wanted to. He did actually sue the election supervisor's office in multiple counties, including Broward County. And so when I say it's weird that Rick Scott is the loudest, it's because he didn't actually need to be the loudest. He was the beneficiary, if you will, of the election fraud. So Rick Scott came out and started. So once Marco Rubio retweeted this video from Tim Canova's page, and it's, I think at this point it's almost at 4 million views. So I have to give I'm not a fan of Marco Rubio, but he has been addressing this issue, by the way, in a very nonpartisan way. If you notice the things that he has said on his Twitter regarding the election fraud or election integrity issue, he has pretty much been saying, we want to make sure that every vote is counted. Now, if you were paying attention to the mainstream, then you may even believe that it was Andrew Gillum calling for every vote to be counted. You may even believe, as much as I like Bernie Sanders, that Bernie Sanders had called for every vote to be counted. You may believe that the liberals or the quote-unquote progressives were the ones who called for every vote to be counted, but it actually was not. And I have to give credit where credit is due in this regard, because it was Marco Rubio retweeting that video that was put out by the volunteer from Tim Canova's campaign, who was also a fan of this show. Shout out to her. She knows who she is. It was Marco Rubio who called. He said, why isn't any of the local media or the authorities paying attention to that video? And that video was, once again, of a group of personal vehicles individually dropping off ballots from a different precinct and mixing them up. Those people were traveling in their vehicles alone with ballots, with no one else to observe them. And Marco Rubio called attention to this. Now, with that being said, I call this entire situation convoluted because the Democrats have been screaming, every vote counts, right? That's what Andrew Gillum has been trying to pretend like he cares about. The Republicans are trying to make this about Rick Scott specifically. Liberals are rigging the election. The liberals are committing voter fraud or election. Well, actually, no, I think he is claiming voter fraud, not election fraud. Instead of addressing the election integrity issue, the liberals then turned around and started blaming the Republicans for committing election fraud, and specifically Rick Scott. Which was weird because Rick Scott already won his race. He already won. Which I don't know why he's been opening his mouth about it so much. I don't know. Like that's really uncharacteristic of Republicans to care about something after they've already won. That's usually not how the game goes, right? So on the other side of that spectrum, you even have some quote unquote progressives saying that Tim Canova is working with Republicans to stop all of the votes from being counted or to stop the recount, which is weird also because Tim Canova is the reason that we're even having this conversation. You all are aware of that, right? I mean, for a plethora of reasons. Whether you want to talk about his lawsuit against Brenda Snipes that he won, whether you want to talk about the fact that he is at this moment, at this juncture, outside of Stacey Abrams, because Stacey Abrams, shout out to her, is still fighting for those people in Georgia more than I can say for Andrew Gillum. But Tim Canova is the reason these recounts are happening. Tim Canova is the only reason that anybody is even questioning the integrity of that election. And yet, there are people on the left who are complaining because, well, Fox News reached out to Tim to cover it. RT reached out to Tim to cover it. Lee Camp reached out to me, and Lee Camp covered it. So CNN knows how to find Tim Canova. They've had him on before. MSNBC knows how to find Tim Canova. Liberal networks know how to find him. But yet, only Fox contacted him. Obviously, RT as well, which I consider RT nonpartisan. So why, ladies and gentlemen, do you believe that only the right contacted Tim Canova? Well, I believe that the right contacted Tim Canova and not the left, because they were the ones who benefited the most from the election fraud, because their girl, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, was the one who helped to commit the election fraud. Now, if this is your first time hearing about the election fraud, let me do a brief recap. Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Tim Canova ran against each other initially in 2016. Tim Canova got his boost from being the candidate who was poised after receiving an endorsement, from Bernie Sanders. He was poised to beat Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Really, not even poised to beat, but just pure obliterate her in that primary election in 2016. However, that was not the case. Now, Tim was not confident in these election results because field numbers don't tend to lie, especially when they're as when you've knocked on as many doors as they did during that election. The truth of the matter is, he thought he was cheated. When he went to go find out if he was cheated, and he called for those ballots to be recounted, Brenda Snipes couldn't find the ballots. So then he had a federal court subpoena Brenda Snipes, who was the supervisor of elections of Broward County. When the court asked to see those ballots, Brenda Snipes destroyed those ballots. So we can pretty safely assume that he won. He won the election. Now, fast forward, Tim runs again, but he realized that there will be no culpability or accountability on behalf of Brenda Snipes, and therefore he cannot afford to run as a Democrat in that primary again because he would just be cheated. It would be a waste of resources, and it would just not really benefit anyone because we know how the outcome will be again, unfortunately. So he ran as an independent. Surged. Tim Canova, still a rock star in Broward County. I know because I was on the ground for him. I witnessed people walking by as we were canvassing, as we were turning people in the lines at voting while we were voting. Even just walking down the street with Tim Canova, you have people cheering for him. However, the numbers didn't really say that, right? The numbers came out that Tim Canova got 5% of the entire vote, and somehow, some way, Debbie Wasserman Schultz got 58, close to 59%, which would actually mean that she grew more popular over the last 2 years. Now, no one in their right damn mind believes that Debbie Wasserman Schultz all of a sudden became more popular. If I had a choice to hang out with a pile of garbage than Debbie Wasserman Schultz, matter of fact, I'm not even going to insult that pile of garbage by trying to compare it to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So my point is, No one likes this woman. No one. I can't even repeat on my channel some of the stuff that I heard when people were describing how they feel about Debbie Wasserman Schultz because of the fear that YouTube may take this video down for obscene language and vulgarity. I am not exaggerating, and anyone who volunteered with Nova's campaign can assure you that I am not exaggerating. Okay, they do not and did not like this woman at all whatsoever. Now, fast forward. We all know ballots started being found by Brenda Snipes, by Broward County in general. But this wasn't only happening, in Broward, but it was the main locations where a lot of ballots were found. There was some suspicious activity going on, like what I described in the video, like in the video that I'm going to be posting later on this evening. There was something off, to say the least. So they're finding more votes, right? There's a bunch of videos where Brenda Snipes is kind of like counting ever so slowly because the entire world is watching her, right? And there are more ballots being found. But for some reason, the more ballots that were being found, the less total votes Tim Canova, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Joe Kaufman had in their election. Now, let me explain. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see here, Debbie Wasserman Schultz had 154,052 votes, whereas Tim Canova had 12,900. So you had 58.4% and 4.9% respectively. Now, if you look at the updated results, the more recent ones, or the most recent ones, Debbie Wasserman Schultz actually increased her percentage to 58.95%, almost 59%, with 148,000 votes. Tim Canova went down also to 12,815 votes with 5.1%. So in the initial graphic that I showed you, Debbie Wasserman Schultz had 154,000, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz later on, 2 days later, had 148,000. The initial graphic I showed you, Tim Canova had 12,900 votes. Then 2 days later, 12,815. Now, somebody want to explain to me what's off about that? If we're finding more votes, then why are we seeing a dip in the numbers? I don't think that has... Listen, people. Listen. You can ask Miss Peterson, my 7th grade math teacher, who didn't really like me that much because I was great at math, but I was a really bad kid. You can tell her, I was strong in algebra. I was really good in algebra. So if you give me that A and that B, or give me an A and a C, I can find your B. Now, what I can't do, however, is what apparently in Broward County is known as reverse math. I don't know how to add shit up and then make things disappear. I don't know how to do that. I didn't learn that in Miss Peterson's 7th grade math class. I didn't know that in Miss Richardson's 3rd grade when she was teaching me how to, we were singing our songs, learn our math multiplication tables. I ain't learned anything that would have taught me that finding more ballots means less total votes for all the candidates. So clearly, there was something more nefarious afoot, something more diabolical, and I think that one of our colleagues hit the nail right on the head. He called it what's called fraction magic. No matter what happens, Tim Canova was going to be capped at around 5.10% or 0.1% or 5% just in general. And no matter what happened, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was going to be at or around 60% of the votes. So it would make sense that a machine was programmed to give you a certain percentage no matter what, would adjust the numbers accordingly. No matter what happened. Now, why would I think something like that? Why would I think something like that? Conspiracy, hoopla, nonsense, some of you would say. Maybe not that many of you. If you're watching this, you probably know that none of this is nonsense. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument, this is your first time hearing about me, this is your first time watching the show, and you've never heard of election fraud, or you never know what's going on in Broward County. I'm going to tell you something. Broward County Election Supervisor, their office specifically reported 800,000 people voted in this year's election. That is actually very impressive. It's very impressive. Tim Canova and Debbie Wasserman Schultz run in Florida District 23. 23 damn near encompasses, give or take, about 50 to 100,000 people. Florida 23 encompasses all of Broward County. That is a massive district. You're talking about Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, Plantation, Sunrise. It's a huge district. Oh, 1 second, we got a super chat. Stephanie, hey, what's going on? Thank you, Niko, for having feet and eyes on the ground for Tim. I was ready to break stuff from election results. So mad. So made myself stay offline for a week. Can you give a summary of what happened for those of us catching up now? That's actually what I'm doing right now, Stephanie. So you came on just at the right time. So thank you. And I totally understand. We were all really pissed off at Tim's office whenever we saw the results, because we knew from the very beginning that they were illegitimate. So I was just as upset, but I'm glad that we kind of recouped the next day, and now we are still trying our hardest to move things forward on multiple fronts. It isn't just Tim Canova's campaign, but there are some people who are working independent of Tim Canova's campaign who are trying to do the same thing. So, like I was saying, Broward County, massive people. There are 200,000 people in like one corner of Broward County. 800,000 people voted total. But guess how many people voted according to the numbers, the final numbers? So if there are such thing as final numbers in this election, I think that that's a fleeting notion at this point. But 251,000 people voted in Florida District 23. Florida District 23 encompasses almost all of Broward County. It should be as many people voted roughly in the gubernatorial election for Florida District 23. That should have been the relative same amount as the people who voted for congressperson. So out of the 800,000 people who voted, about 550 people or so decided they weren't going to vote for their representative, even though people really wanted Debbie Wasserman Schultz out of there. Even despite the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that Tim Canova in a primary election got 25,000 plus votes, and yet only 12,900 to 13,000 votes. Depending, like I said, we don't know what the numbers look like at this point. We don't know. They change. They change every hour. Clearly, there was a lot of problems in this election. And like I said, that issue happened to take place in Fort Lauderdale, and it happened to be seemingly so benefiting the Republicans, the Democrats. But it's so there's so much election fraud being committed, and you know that the other party is guilty. The reason I say that that Rick Scott is guilty, I think that he started harping on that recount so much because he was worried that there was going to be some election fraud that the Republicans were going to be found responsible for later on down the line if he did not take that video seriously because, like I said, I don't think Marco Rubio was in on the deal. I don't think that he was part of that because he retweeted that video and he was like, what the hell's going on? And then Rick Scott spoke up about it. But don't be fooled, ladies and gentlemen, because Tim Canova reached out to Rick Scott. Tim Canova asked Rick Scott to fire Brendan Snipes, which he does have the constitutional authority to do. Rick Scott gave him the proverbial middle finger, did nothing about it. And in fact, Tim Canova was given some insight from Republican insiders that said specifically that they were told not to do anything because Broward County officials were working with the Republicans. Yeah. So when I tell you that it's laughable that Rick Scott is pretending to care all of a sudden, I mean that. It's laughable. Boy, you had your chance to hold her accountable. In fact, you are still the acting governor, and you're doing all this grandstanding about, oh, we need to have a recount, voter fraud being committed across the board, Brendan Snipes this, Brendan Snipes that, I'm going to send my officials down, Bro, you could fire her right now to make sure that this gets done right. Excuse me, but Democrats and Republicans are not two different parties, and one of these days you're going to get it. One of these days, you're going to understand that these people are on the same fucking team, people. Same team. So, speaking of Florida elections, for the last couple of weeks, some people would say that I've been being a little tough on Mr. Andrew Gillum. They've been saying that he's fighting for us. He's gonna bring it home. Ignore that private fundraiser he did with Hillary Clinton. Because when has private fundraising ever been indicative of how a candidate is going to behave when they get in office? That's only like all of political history, but whatever. Let's move on. Go ahead and ignore the fact that he was literally campaigning with Bloomberg and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Ignore that. It doesn't mean anything, as some progressives would tell you. He's the much clearer and better option than DeSantis, because even though DeSantis might be racist, Andrew Gillum only works with closet racists. And even though DeSantis might be bad for the environment, Andrew Gillum is taking orders and money from people who are bad for the environment behind closed doors. So it's way different. Okay? DeSantis would mess up Florida in about 6 months. Andrew Gillum will take about a year. Andrew Gillum, I've said for quite some time that I believe that that politics is a vanity project for him. That it's always been about his personal image, that he always wanted to be well liked, that he is looking for the next office. This is a career for him. He's not doing this for the people. I'm not trying to attack his character. I think that Andrew Gillum is a nice guy. And I can't say that about a lot of people that I like, that politically I don't like. I think that Andrew Gillum is legitimately a nice fellow. Like Cory Booker, I don't think he is a nice guy. I think he is an asshole. I think Kamala Harris is some things that my mother would not appreciate me calling a woman. But you know what I'm talking about. Pick one. But I think Andrew Gillum is genuinely a nice guy. I think that he is naive, though. I don't think that he understands politics. I don't think that he understands Florida. I don't think he understands the party that he is working within. I think that he is an Obama. You know what we were calling him? Obama 2.0. I don't think we can call him that anymore, right? We got to call him Obama 0.5 because Obama won his election and he won twice. And he went with the name Obama. And even he knew that when he hits that campaign trail for 2012, Hillary, stay your punk ass at home. We don't want you. We don't need you. You can be Secretary of State whenever you get in. It's fine. Keep your job, but stay away. Okay? Stay away. She may have been popular at one point, but after she pretty much shitted on Obama using racist ads and all other things, I mean, good God. Even Obama knew keep her away. Andrew Gillum did not. So Andrew Gillum has become the Obama 0.5. Not 2.0, but Obama 0.5. Andrew Gillum was well within the margin for a recount, people. He was well within the margin for the recount. And a lot of us thought it was only natural, really, for him to pursue a recount. Apparently, Andrew Gillum did not think it was natural to pursue a recount because before the sun set on that beautiful beach that is Fort Lauderdale Beach, before the sun could even go all the way down, before the stars could appear, before the moon could pull that ocean up to the beach and the beautiful night sky, Andrew Gillum threw in the towel like Rocky Balboa in whatever movie that was where he got his ass whooped. Like, Andrew Gillum, it wasn't even 8 o'clock. I had only had like one beer whenever Andrew Gillum threw in the towel. Andrew Gillum threw in the towel while he still had hair on his head because you know he's balding. Andrew Gillum threw in the towel so fast. Andrew Gillum threw in the towel so fast that I thought that he was it seemed like he was ordered to do it. It seemed like he was straight up ordered to quit. Because if a recount happened, ladies and gentlemen, how are you going to recount ballots that have been thrown away? How are you going to recount ballots that have been misplaced? How are you going to recount ballots that have turned up in Fort Lauderdale airports that are reported as bomb threats? Like, you can't recount ballots that are not there to be recounted. And you don't want spotlight if you are the Dems, specifically if you're not Debbie Wasserman Schultz. You don't want the spotlight on the county that you know has the largest outcome of the election, especially if you just rigged it against one Tim Canova. So this not Tim Canova, excuse me. Andrew Gillum concedes. Hell, Tim Canova got 5% of the vote, quote unquote. You know I say that loosely, right? That quote unquote. Because I don't believe he really got that. But Tim Canova, which his campaign office and the watch party for the election was literally across the street from Andrew Gillum. You were across the street from him. Tim Canova is saying to the television broadcast stations, we are not quitting. We will keep fighting. We will challenge this election. We don't believe the results are legitimate. He has all of us behind him, rallying his troops. Got beat the first time illegitimately, and even though he got cheated, he still wanted to go out and fight. What did Andrew Gillum do? Tim Canova hadn't even finished his speech saying that we're going to keep fighting before Andrew Gillum gave up on Florida. I'm so happy that he didn't win. That boy folded like a towel fresh out the dryer. He folded like a handkerchief in one of my nice blazers. He folded like the eggs that probably aren't really eggs on a McDonald's McGriddle, but we don't say anything about it because nobody wants to really question what's on their food when it comes to being, when it comes from McDonald's. But, he folded. He gave up so quickly. It was damn near like he never wanted to be governed to begin with. Or, like I said, like he was told to. Now, here's why I say this behavior is suspicious. Because after Rick Scott starts screaming like a gorilla at the top of his lungs, beating on his chest, we want the vote to count. We want to recount everything. Oh my God. I care about election integrity now, although I've never said anything about it before this. I acted like I didn't care when Tim Canova told me about this, but now that Marco Rubio tweeted about it, I care again. So it wasn't until Rick Scott said something about the election integrity that Gillum all of a sudden pretended that he wanted every vote to count. But here's what was interesting about that. Gillum talked about he wanted he said, that he wanted every vote to count. But you didn't mention that it was Brenda Snipes' fault that every vote wasn't counted to begin with. He forgot to mention that part, people. At that point, it was Brenda Snipes' fault because they were still finding ballots. There were things popping up in people's cars, like I said, in the Fort Lauderdale airport. I don't know what else we could do to tell the establishment or anyone who wants a legitimate chance of winning that if you want to win, you have to address election integrity. And you have to be willing to combat it head on and not be worried about what the mainstream says about you. And what Andrew Gillum showed is that it doesn't matter if he would have won. He would have folded. He would have thrown Floridians under the bus. Now, we know that Republicans, by far, won, I think, most of the Florida State Assembly. The Florida State House. I think they even won most of the Florida State Senate as well. What would Andrew Gillum have gotten done? What would he have gotten done? How can we count on him to fight for Medicare for all? How can we count on him to fight for our environment? How can we count on him to stand up to the millionaires and billionaires? How can we count on him to stand up to Big Sugar? How can we count on him to stand up to the influence of Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida? We couldn't. And that's why I said it's unfortunate. We don't have a dog in this race. People want to say, well, who are you voting for? If you don't vote for Gillum, you're voting for DeSantis. If you don't vote for DeSantis, well, I don't think really anybody told me to vote for DeSantis. DeSantis was not really. I don't see why DeSantis was even a legitimate horse in the race. But you know why? DeSantis wasn't a legitimate horse in this race until Gillum campaigned with Hillary Clinton and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So my bad. My apologies. And then Gillum made him a factor. But we didn't have a horse in this race, people, and it's hard for some to accept. When you don't have a horse in the race, first of all, let me address that first. In this situation, when people say, well, what are you going to do about it then? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to vote for my local politicians. I'm going to check out what initiatives are on the ballot, I'm going to check out my municipality elections and I'm going to see who the most progressive candidates are, because all politics are local. It is an age-old saying, but it is a classic one nonetheless. So what? Because we have two bad candidates for governor, that means that we don't have good candidates locally? Believe it or not, a lot of places have a lot of good candidates locally, and they are very efficacious. If your commissioner, your county commissioner, and your city council, which sometimes double as a county commission, depending on what your state looks like, they will affect the outcome of your local politics more than almost any governor can, specifically in a state like Florida, where the governor, Miami, we are our own like little entity. What we do in Miami is not necessarily affected by what the governor or the state legislature passes, right? So, for example, you can't buy liquor for 24 hours in all of Florida. You can't. But you can in Miami. You can't walk around with a container of liquor or a beer or get alcohol to go even in all of Florida. But you can in Miami. Why? Because the local politicians said, because we are a tourist city, we have certain, we have to appeal to tourists. I'm sure it's like that in like New Orleans, for example. New Orleans probably isn't as affected by the rest of the laws in Louisiana. So that's what I mean by saying all politics are local. When they tell you who is voting or who are you voting for, Gillum or DeSantis, and you say neither, I'm just using them as the example, and you say neither, and they say, well, you have to vote for one, then you immediately tell them, you make sure you tell them, well, who are you voting for your city council? Who are you voting for your commission? Who is in charge of your kids' schools right now? What are you doing to help? What organizations are you working for, volunteering for? What ballot initiatives are you volunteering for? What issues are you educating yourself on so that you can get other people to vote for ballot initiatives for? What are you doing? Because if you think that voting for, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you believe that voting for a DeSantis or a Gillum is going to change the outcome of anything in your life, then I got some bad news for you. That is the last step in the electoral process. And for the 150,000th time, people. I don't know how many times I can say this shit. But until we address election fraud substantively, until we do not allow election fraud to be a partisan or a Democrat or Republican issue, and realize it is an issue of the establishment, and these corporations are the same corporations that pay both parties, until we can accept these truisms, if you will, and they are truisms, what is the point of voting for Andrew Gillum or Mike DeSantis, other than putting your vote in and having accountability for your vote, which would in turn let you be able to say, well, I feel like, if like 800,000 people voted, which we saw, that's the only reason we know that Tim Conover was screwed over, was because we know that it was recorded that 800,000 people voted in his district, but yet only 200,000 people voted in his race. So that's how we know the discrepancy is there. So it's important from that regard. But if you're talking about important as far as influencing the outcome of any given race at that level, oh no, until we see people being held accountable, I don't want to hear it. Patricia Moreno, super chat, thank you so much. Hi Niko, keep up the good fight. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Watching this and being able to educate others and spread awareness is also part of being part of that fight. So I thank you, and I encourage you to keep up the good fight, keep spreading awareness and doing whatever you do locally to make sure that these issues are dealt with. And I think that awareness is probably the most important thing that most of us can do right now, because a lot of people don't know things are happening. But once you tell them, it's almost like they get sucked in and they can't help but know more, and they can't help but tell other people because they realize how much this affects everybody and not just the people who are paying attention. So thank you. Really quick. Damn, I think I forgot what I was about to say. Oh no, really quick. Speaking of accountability, has anybody noticed something? You want to know if Rick Scott or Andrew Gillum or even, actually not Jeb, because Jeb was one of the few to talk about this, but the people who are purposely trying to make this a partisan issue. MSNBC, and I'll tell you a story about what I saw earlier. You notice something. They say, we want recounts. We need to count every vote. We need to have A, B, and C, right? We need to count, find votes, find out where votes are, check machine. Everybody's talking about what we should do with the votes, what the voters should have did, what voters should be doing, what we should do next time. You hear anybody asking for accountability who's trying to make this a partisan issue? You hear Rick Scott saying specifically, the person with the power to do so, saying we need to initiate a removal process for Brenda Snipes. Have you heard that? I haven't heard that at all. Qué interesante. How interesting that everybody wants recounts. Everybody's so upset about the election fraud. Everybody is having issues, but no one takes issue with the fact that nobody is being held accountable, despite we have elected officials and election officials specifically so that when shit goes wrong, people are held accountable. We put someone in who's going to get the job done right, and if they don't get the job done right, then we can replace them after we hold them accountable, and so on and so forth. And yet, everyone is talking about they want election integrity. Everyone. But no one wants to hold people accountable. Jay Bird, thanks for the super chat, my man. Amazing usage of R&B color scam from the duopoly. Here in Minnesota, we're getting Enbridge. I'm not sure what Enbridge Line 3 pipeline. Oh, another pipeline? Good God. Here in Minnesota, we're getting Enbridge Line 3 pipeline replaced. Deal without Minnesota residents' consent. I didn't know that was legal. Treaty land. The boundary waters are at high risk. Thank you for what you do. I appreciate that. And wow, I did not know that. So there's a pipeline going through Minnesota, or about to go through Minnesota, and the people weren't even talked to about it. That's what I say. All politics are local. You think if the commissioners, if the people picked progressive commissioners, would they have allowed that to take place? Probably not. All politics are local. Thanks for that update, Jay Bird, and that's definitely something worth looking into, people. Check that out for sure. So yeah, everyone from the duopoly, are trying to pretend how much they care about ballots and election integrity and all that shit, and yet no one is actually talking about holding Brenda Snipes accountable. Triana B. Fine. That's a nice name. I like that. Smooth. Niko. Criminals can't hold other criminals accountable. Then someone might hold them accountable. That is it. I couldn't have said it any better myself. I went on Twitter the other day and said this pretty much in rendition of the same thing. I said It's interesting that everyone is talking about a recount, and yet people are calling for a recount without asking for accountability or questioning who is doing the counting or the recounting. Why do I want a recount with Brenda Snipes, who was responsible for rigging the damn election to begin with? I don't get the logic there. I don't get it. Do you get it? I don't. Well, I get the logic. The logic is that then nobody will, the election, they get to determine the outcome of the recount. Nobody gets held accountable, etc., etc., etc. And we go back to business as usual. Florida getting away with electoral proverbial murder again, just like in 2004. I believe there was even a discrepancy in 2012. Obviously, we know there was one in 2016 with Tim Canova's campaign. And the wheels keep on turning. It's difficult, people. It's difficult to... I get there is something that we learned from this. Just really quick before we take our little 5-minute break. There is something that we learned from this, and that is right now, every bit of the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, or any independent, every bit of their resources need to go into creating a more transparent and democratic process. Every bit of their funding must go to getting automatic ballot access every election. It must go into requiring debates for all candidates who have legally filed to run for office at any given level if a debate is requested. They must focus their efforts on getting ranked choice voting. They must focus their efforts on making sure that our elections are tabulated with paper ballots. Why do I say that? Because Tim Canova magically lost 12 to 13,000 votes when he switched from Democrat to Independent. Why? Tim Canova doesn't have the infrastructure to hire anybody to run an election in Broward County that is dominantly blue. If the district was red, he would have the exact same problem. See, the duopoly has made it so that independents are having an incredibly hard time getting on the ballots and getting to the debate stage for a reason. And we'll get a little bit more into that after this short break. So stick around, don't go anywhere. And make sure that more than anything else, people, find your balance. Be right back. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? We are back with our second half of American Freedom Radio's Mika Says Sukasa, and as always, I am your humble host, Niko House. Thank you all so much for sticking around. We had to get on that 5-minute break. As you can imagine, talking for an hour can take a lot out of me, so I had to get some water and, obviously take a break from talking. But we are back. So many of you stuck around, and I greatly appreciate that. So as usual, I want to thank our Patreon subscribers. We couldn't do this without you. Seriously, I cannot exaggerate how much I love you guys, how much you all have gotten me through the year, how much you've just really been the major cog in this machine that is the MCSC network, and that is the truth that we bring to the masses, really, because we have the time now and the capability in some of the money to invest in that truth. So if you want to be a member of the MCSC Network's Patreon, just go to www.patreon.com/MikaSaysSukasa, or you can click on the link below. As usual, go ahead and subscribe to Roku if you have not. Last week, we took a break from uploading to Roku because of the election, and that's where my focus was. So this week, we will be back to uploading regularly to Roku, and all the election fraud stuff will be on there as well. So if you have not, join us, subscribe on Roku, Roku's first independent news platform. And of course, as usual, make sure that you join us on JustNForm.com. So we have some recently breaking news. This came out today. Rick Scott's monitors somehow agree with state police officers that there was no Florida voter fraud. I don't really think that there was a claim of voter fraud. We're going to read the article, and y'all going to be as mad as I am when y'all... Cause I hate these articles because there's so many misnomers, so much misdirection, and it changes the narrative from what it's supposed to be about. But hey, what's new, right? At this point, I don't think anybody is surprised by that. At this point. So let me go ahead and read this article for you guys. Governor Rick Scott asked state law enforcement to investigate Broward County election officials because of potential rampant voter fraud, even though monitors from his own administration say they have seen none in that county. Quote unquote, according to Bill Nelson. Oh, excuse me, not according to Bill Nelson. Quote unquote, our staff has seen no evidence of criminal activity at this time. Department of State spokeswoman Sarah Revel wrote in an email on Saturday. Scott is the state's current governor and the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate with a narrow lead over incumbent Senator Bill Nelson. The assessment, which was first reported by the Miami Herald, jives with that given by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which said Friday it has also seen no allegation of fraud. So, I want to be very clear about something. No one made claims of election fraud. Of voter fraud. Tim Canova did not make any claims of voter fraud either. I don't even think that Rick Scott himself made claims of voter fraud. And it is important to make that distinction because voter fraud would imply that the voters were attempting to defraud the government, and therefore I don't believe that Rick Scott would need to necessarily sue Broward County as much as he would need to hold that particular voter or those particular voters accountable. So that's why I say it's important to understand and maintain the correct narrative, because if they're actually talking about legitimate voter fraud, then they would be correct. There probably would not be any examples of voter fraud, of rampant voter fraud, because that almost never happens. That is a Republican scare tactic. The idea that millions of Latin voters are coming from Mexico to persuade the election against Republicans. And it's crazy because I'm thinking for me personally, I'm nonpartisan, right? And this is just an aside, a brief aside. I'm a nonpartisan voter. I'm a nonpartisan broadcaster. I am nonpartisan in general. And so the idea that millions of people are voting in an election even though they aren't American citizens, if I was personally running, then I wouldn't actually care. And I'm going to explain why, just briefly. I want Medicare and healthcare for all. I want the military-industrial complex to be ended for the good of all who are affected by it. I want comprehensive immigration reform that creates a clear path to citizenship for all who deserve it, for all who have applied for it. I want good wages for all people. So if you're worried somehow that people coming from another country would vote against you just for the sake of you being you, it's probably because you're worried that your rhetoric would somehow negatively impact those people's outlook on your candidacy. Just saying. I'm just saying, peeps. By the way, share this. So anyway, like I was saying, voter fraud, it is important to make the distinction between election fraud and voter fraud because, once again, that rhetoric in a court where someone is being held accountable, if you say a voter fraud or election fraud, the judge is going to take you at your word. And I being part of the DNC fraud lawsuit, saw our case get dismissed, even though it was without prejudice, and we're back in the game, but we got held up over a jurisdictional issue because of rhetoric. So imagine the importance of saying election fraud versus voter fraud. So they're probably right. There is no voter fraud now. I will say this: if this article and his administration and that law enforcement is somehow trying to claim that there was no rampant election fraud, then I have a couple of videos that they need to see. I think that Marco Rubio retweeting that video shows you just how serious the election fraud in Florida has been. Like, I don't know if fraud necessarily, I can't remember legally if it is in if incompetence can be fraud. Like, can you be defrauded if somebody does it by accident? Can you be defrauded if, like, say, for example, people were taking ballots, like, individually without Brendan Snipes telling them to, but Brendan Snipes later finds the ballots? Is that still considered fraud? I would say yeah. I would say absolutely. I would say that by Brenda Snipes telling me and my friend Suzanne Murphy to leave a polling location because we were observing how the ballots were being collected because we saw suspicious behavior, by her lying and saying that we needed to be registered as poll observers with the Broward County Election Supervisor's office, when there is no statute that says that, in my opinion, is election fraud. But that's just one story. When ballots are turning up in airports, there was a bomb threat called in today at Fort Lauderdale Airport. Ballots were turning up at Fort Lauderdale Airport. There are news cameras everywhere in Broward County. They're so close. There are so many cameras on Brenda Snipes that you can make a 3D video or a 360 video. You know, the newfangled 360 video that they have. You can look on YouTube, or not on YouTube, on Facebook, and see everything going around. You can see a 360 view of Brenda Snipes' whole head and everything Like, because of how many people are watching this woman. And all these people are watching her because there is no possibility that election fraud took place, despite the fact that she was finding ballots not 1 day later, not 2 days later, but 3 days later, 4 days later. It's Monday, it's Veterans Day, and we're still counting ballots. We're still finding ballots in that fucking airport, people. We're finding ballots in the airport, and yet Rick Scott's administration, the Department of Law Enforcement, also is trying to claim that there is no election fraud. We're all just imagining things. Who did they ask? How do you figure there wasn't any election fraud? Who did they ask? What was the procedure? How did they verify the chain of custody? Because I can tell you very clearly, the moment that chain of custody was broken, there was potential fraud. But how did you investigate? Because I know you didn't ask myself, one of the first people who posted the videos, about the issue with the chain of custody. I know for a fact, unless Tim has not told me over the last several conversations that we've had daily, the authorities did not contact Tim Canova. They have not contacted Joanne, the volunteer who produced that video, who asks very clearly, are y'all allowed to do this in the video? Because clearly they were not. So what procedure was taking place to prove this? The same one that was taking place, I guess, to hold Brenda Snipes accountable the last time she cheated, which was absolutely none. Yay! Democracy. Rah, fucking democracy. Anyway, we have some more news, some more breaking news. Hey, there's some good news. I can say there is some good news. So as you all know, Stacey Abrams refused to concede. And to be honest, I was impressed. I was impressed because Stacey Abrams is in a weird situation, in my opinion. She's in a weird situation because she's in a state that is dominantly Republican. She is running as a black woman, despite the fact that some people would like to say that has no implication on how people see her and what people expect from her. Being a black male in politics, I beg to differ. They tried to bully her into backing down. The Republicans in that particular state were cheating. They purged 500,000 people of color with absolutely no one being held accountable for that purge. And the person who is supposed to be holding people accountable for that purge, who is in charge of the electoral process in Georgia, is also running for freaking governor. What is going on in this country? I'm sorry. Every time I say that out loud, I'm just like, what the hell? But it's okay, because boldly, it looks like Stacey Abrams took a page out of Tim Canova's book, and it's fighting this election and election fraud being committed by the Republicans this time, tooth and nail, until the very, very last vote is counted, and that there is some accountability. Now, unfortunately, one of our friends came out the woodwork to collect on this issue. Who do y'all think it was? Is it A, Cory Booker, B, Hillary Clinton, C, Kamala Harris, or D, all the above? Well, if you guess all the above, normally you probably wouldn't be that wrong. But it was, in fact, Kamala freaking Harris. This woman is what Pace magazine described as effectively draining money from Stacey Abrams. Let me let you know how it goes. So, I love the way they start off the article. It says, Siri, please show me the perfect metaphor for how National Democrats deliberately cannibalize progressive causes in order to serve their own financial ends. And then it has a picture of a tweet from Kamala Harris. Stacey Abrams could win or force a runoff despite her Republican opponent's rampant voter suppression. Donate here to make sure every vote in Georgia is counted. Seems harmless, right? She's trying to raise money, quote unquote, for a candidate whose election is being stolen in front of our very eyes. Kamala Harris is clearly helping, right? Wrong, people. You gotta read the fine print. And guess what the fine print says? Note, your contribution will be divided evenly between Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris. Click here to allocate those funds and those amounts differently. People, Kamala Harris is trying to use the plight, the struggle, and the fight of Stacey Abrams to raise money for herself. Probably for her presidential campaign. Actually, no, yeah, it would be for her presidential campaign. She isn't up for re-election. Do you understand how disgusting that is? She is, like the article says, effectively stealing money from Stacey Abrams. And once again, without asking for accountability for the voter suppression. Without asking for accountability for the election fraud. Why aren't you down there with your physical presence asking for a recount? Why aren't you encouraging both the Democrats and the Republicans to coalesce around Stacey Abrams as she continues the fight for that Georgia gubernatorial election, to make sure that those voters' voices are heard? No, instead, you hold a fake fundraiser to say, let's make sure every vote counts, like that's going to somehow help. It would help if all of the money, because understand, people, fighting for democracy gets expensive for some odd reason. For some odd reason, democracy is expensive. Stacey Abrams needs every single dollar that she can get to fight this issue. And yet, Kamala Harris is taking half of her money away after pretending like she's doing it altruistically, because she can't fundraise on. People are like, well, isn't it good because Stacey Abrams gets some money? Not if it's, in my opinion, it's not good if the money, if even half of that money, if even a quarter of that money ultimately ends up in Kamala Harris's pocket, which will ultimately be used in the presidential campaign, which will ultimately undermine the progressive candidate who's going to run against her in 2020. She has nothing hopeful to say. She does not contribute anything of substance to this discussion, to discussion of politics in general. She is effectively null and void. morally bankrupt. Hell, even her own election wasn't legitimate. That's a different discussion for a different day. But her senatorial election was not legitimate. And instead of raising money and giving 100% of that to Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris decided that it was best to take half of Stacey Abrams' donations in a fight where she needs every single dollar she can get. That is absolutely abhorrent behavior, even for a neoliberal. Even for a neoliberal. Now, some of you all may recall one Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer was Abdul Assad's goodness gracious. I can't talk today, people. Opponent in the Michigan gubernatorial primary election for the Democratic Party. Some of you may have even thought that Gretchen Whitmer was progressive because Abdul Al-Sayed even came back out to endorse her. I got some bad news for y'all. Abdul isn't as progressive as you think he is. So there's that. But also, Bernie Sanders did come out to stomp for her a little bit. Right? And you know, Bernie Sanders, huge proponent of Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders himself hates insurance companies. He hates the corporatocracies. He hates the quid pro quo-esque behavior of hiring executives bringing executives into political offices based merely on nothing but they donated a lot of money to your campaign and they want to control the outcome of your policy crafting. He hates that stuff, right? He would never endorse a candidate who does that stuff. Except for the time where he endorsed a candidate named Gretchen Whitmer who won office, who, as The Intercept put it, Michigan's Democratic governor puts Blue Cross and Blue Shield executive on transition team after the company funded her campaign. But let me elaborate. When former Michigan Senate minority leader Gretchen Whitmer faced a populist progressive rival in the Democratic gubernatorial primary earlier this year, Abdul is not that progressive, so I just want to be very clear about that one more time. And that's a different video. But she had a little help from her health insurance industry friends. Whitmer was hosted at a fundraiser thrown by lobbyists for Blue Cross Blue Shield. She netted about $144,000 during a single day event. The company's interest in the race came as no surprise, of course, as Whitmer's chief rival, former Detroit Public Health Chief Abdul Al-Sayed, was campaigning on establishing a statewide single-payer healthcare system. Essentially, he was running to put that company out of business, which is true. But it appears that Blue Cross and Blue Shield gained more than just the defeat of single-payer. This week, Whitmer won the governor's mansion, putting the state back in the Democratic column, but she quickly announced the composition of her transition team. And one of the quote-unquote honorary co-chairs is Daniel Lupp, the president and CEO of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Michigan. Can you get any more overtly disgusting when it comes to showing the people how much the oligarchy, how much the corporatocracy controls our electoral process and our politicians? For Bernie Sanders, you got to start doing better research, my friend. You have to start doing better research before you... I get it. You're trying to position yourself to win the endorsement of people in states that you will need it. And Michigan is one of those states. I get it. I know how politics works. I understand how the games are played. But what you are making the mistake of, once again, in my humble opinion, I may not be the foremost expert, but I'm better than whatever people you have advising you, because they would tell you you are making the same mistake that you made before, which is assuming that the Democrats are going to act on the same level of moral accountability that you are going to act on. In other words, you are taking the Democrats at their word, and you are sacrificing your integrity, your image, and your brand as a progressive to do so. I expected this out of Gretchen Whitmer. If you would have talked to people on the ground in Michigan, they would have told you that they expected this out of Gretchen Whitmer. Even though Abdul was not the perfect candidate, he was still a better option than Gretchen Whitmer. Because at the very bare minimum, at least he talked the talk all the way into the very end when it came to single payer health care. At the very bare minimum. He has other issues. But he talked the talk when it came to single payer. So, my question to Bernie Sanders is, when you have someone stab you in the back like this, because that's what I consider it a betrayal. Because if anybody knows me, I am a proponent of people being very careful when it comes to their personal brand. And it makes sense today, in today's world, one's personal brand, how people are viewed in the eyes of the general public, especially when you're a politician or a broadcast journalist or anything like that, can be the determining factor on whether or not, like, on the trajectory of your entire career. And Bernie Sanders, despite what he may believe, is not he is not an exception to that rule. Because, yeah, you have the people's hearts right now, but Michigan will remember come 2020 how you went out and supported Gretchen Whitmer. And when Gretchen Whitmer doesn't endorse you, you're going to have to explain why, but it won't need much explanation. It will come off as you being gullible and you doing whatever, like doing the politically expedient thing by placing your faith in these politicians to back you, when we never cared about their endorsements to begin with. And I know that you're like, the people care, but the new people that you bring into the political system are not going to care about Gretchen Whitmer or what she has to say as to whether or not the people should vote for you in 2020. Like, when I first started my political process, or like when I first became woke, if you will, because I was in politics, but I wasn't as woke as I am now. Oh my goodness, I done forgot North Carolina's governor's name because he was so forgettable. He didn't do anything. The governor of North Carolina, and I cannot remember his name right now, even though I literally competed against him, or I helped compete against him. Forgive me, I can't remember his name right now. But the governor of North Carolina at the time would have endorsed Bernie Sanders. Well, not back then it was Pat McCrory. But say if it was a Democrat, do you think that I would have been swayed one way or another by some random Democrat endorsing another Democrat in a race against a Democrat? I would assume it probably has personal interest involved. I would have been like, okay, that's cool, I guess, and then go on about my business. Or do you think that would influence me to change my mind? Or go vote, or get up and register myself to go vote for you? Or do you think that single payer would change my mind? Do you think that the endorsement from the college students, from nurses, from teachers, from the people? Remember, FDR wasn't well liked by his counterparts, like by his colleagues, nor was he well liked by corporations. Do you think that helped to fuel his victory, or did that hurt his victory? Because the people hold no disillusion. Most of the people hold no disillusion as to whom their enemies are. They are very aware that the political establishment is an enemy of the people. They are very aware that the military-industrial complex is an enemy of the people, and those who perpetuate it are enemies of the people. They are very aware that the corporations and this corporatocracy are enemies of the people. So the person who manages to rise into the spotlight while receiving, not only not receiving their endorsements, but by being actively attacked by those people rather than being endorsed by those people, that is what will win you an election. An unapologetic progressive platform doesn't stop at the policies, but it also has to include and incorporate the people that you put your name behind. And you put your name behind a candidate in Gretchen Whitmer, in Andrew Gillum, and Jimmy Gomez in California, who are going to betray the very message that made you the most popular candidate in the country to begin with. I don't understand your logic. Like I said, maybe it's strategy. Maybe it's a strategy, but it's not a strategy that I think is a winning one. I don't know what he's thinking. I want to read a little bit more from this article. In a 2015 interview, Whitmer credited his name is spelled L-O-E-P-P. I'm going to go with Lepp. But Whitmer credited Lepp with being the first person to suggest that she enter politics back when he worked in the state legislature. People, do you hear what this is? In 2015, the person that works for Blue Shield, that is the CEO of Blue Cross and Blue Shield in Michigan, told her she should enter politics. And just that quickly, it is 23. It's bruh. She's barely been in politics. I mean, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being governor that quick, but what I'm saying is she had all these connections. She had all the people behind her. She had barely been in politics. And the person who told her to run ends up being CEO of Blue Cross and Blue Shield in Michigan, holds a massive fundraiser for her, ends up on the transition team for her administration, is an honorary chairperson of that transition team. Excuse me, an honorary, what do they call her? Oh, one of the honorary co-chairs of that transition team. And we're supposed to believe that honorary co-chair is not going to influence Gretchen Whitmer when it comes to policies about healthcare. I can't, people. I can't. When are we going to start? I mean, I know y'all are awake. I know it. I know y'all are awake. But it just is very disappointing to me that Bernie Sanders endorsed her, because it was known very, very, very early on. Gretchen Whitmer was not on our team. And that's what's disappointing to me, I think. That's what's most disappointing to me is that he knew that Gretchen Whitmer wasn't on our squad and he still endorsed her. So, man. I'm going to move on in a second. Let me get some agua. I got to cover this up because I'm ashamed that I'm drinking out of this bottle. But there aren't that many options for clean water. Nestle pretty much runs everything, unfortunately. Moving on. Your best friend, Jeb Bush, aka, please applaud. That Jeb Bush. He's back on the scene and he believes that Broward County official Brenda Snipes should be removed from office, and I can't really say that I blame him. According to The Hill, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, quote unquote Republican, called for, I call him quote unquote Republican because there's a part of me that believes that Jeb Bush is actually a liberal, but that's a different discussion. Sorry about that. But former Florida Governor Jeb Bush called for the removal of Broward County Supervisor of Elections Brenda Snipes. He said, there is no question that Broward County Supervisor of Election Brenda Snipes failed to comply with Florida law on multiple counts, undermining Floridians' confidence in our electoral process, Bush tweeted. Supervisor Snipes should be removed from her office following the recount. No, Jeb! No! Not following the recounts. Removed from office following the recounts? Jeb, that means after the recounts. She's the one who messed up the counts to begin with. I don't know what else. What more do I need to say? How many more times can I tweet this out? How many more videos can I make? How many more can people scream this at the top of their lungs? How many more times does a Tim Canova need to be cheated? How many more times does a Brenda Snipes need to get away with it? How many more Debbie Wasserman shows do we elect to the office before we realize that you can't have the same people who cheated to begin with do the recounting? That's as silly as a situation in Georgia where the person who is running for governor is in charge of the electoral process. And it's cheating also. I don't know what the hell. Like, I was like, oh, when I read this, I'm like, oh, okay. When I first read this, I was, okay, cool. Jeb is putting pressure on the Republicans. He's very popular with the Republican Party top officials. So maybe, just maybe, he'll say something that I agree with in this regard because the Republicans are trying to make it seem like the Democrats are. You know, Republican pettiness is real. And I thought that he was going to say something I would have at least laughed about. And I was like, ha, he wants Snipes out of office. Ha, Rick Scott is going to, double down on it because now Jeb Bush has said something. He is this current governor still. He is still in power, still has a constitutional ability to remove Brenda Snipes. And yet Jeb Bush said that after the recounts have concluded, after is when she should be removed. Don't they have somebody who is second in command that can finish the recount? Get her ass out of power, please. For the sake of literally everyone in Florida and really everybody in the country, because if Tim Canova was able to unseat Debbie Wasserman Schultz, shit would roll downhill in a way that I believe could affect the outcome of not just the Bruh. You don't protect somebody to the degree that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is protected. If like the Republicans weren't working with the Democrats to protect Hillary Clinton. Like Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the skeleton key to the corruption of both the Democrat and the Republican Party. Is the skeleton key to the corruption really in the 2016 election? Is the skeleton key to you're talking about Clinton Foundation stuff, the Seth Rich investigation, which she tried to impede on for whatever reason. We can go on for days. Debbie Wasserman Schultz being unseated would only be possible, however, if Brenda Snipes was kept out of office. So I want to go ahead and read some more of this article. Snipes' leadership has come under attack as Broward struggles to count the remaining votes in the 2018 midterm elections held last Tuesday. 3 statewide races in Florida, including the gubernatorial and the Senate race, are headed for recount, sparking a legal fight over the counting process. Snipes was appointed by Bush when he was governor after he suspended her predecessor, Marianne Oliphant, in November 2003 for what he called grave neglect and mismanagement and incompetence. That part of the election, that I didn't know. I didn't know he was the one who appointed her. Holy shit. That's new. Did anybody else know that? I just learned something new today. Brenda Snipes was actually appointed by Jeb Bush, and now he is calling for her removal. But let's be clear about something. Jeb Bush appointed a Democrat to be the supervisor of elections in Broward County. That's just an interesting note. So as it currently stands, by the way, just as a quick, one more thing. So other issues, according to the Sun Sentinel, included a court ruling that she destroyed ballots from 2016, which you all know, Tim Canova. After 12 months, though federal law demands that in order to destroy ballots, you must wait 22 months to do so. Snipes' office did not immediately reply to a request for comment from the Hill, but Snipes has come under intense criticism from Republican leaders, unfortunately, and they have left out that Tim Canova also has criticized her, and they have left out there have been progressive pundits across the board who have all criticized her. Now, I will say this, people. And this is going to be a separate video. TYT's silence. TYT's silence on the Tim Canova issue, on Brenda Snipes' corruption, on the video that Marco Rubio retweeted. Once again, don't like the guy that much as far as his politics is concerned, but it was very, very noble of you to retweet that and ask the question that so many of us nonpartisan participants have questioned. Why haven't the authorities said or done anything about this, and why haven't local news stations picked up on it? And he was the reason that local news stations did start picking up on the election integrity issue in that area. So once again, don't like the guy's politics, but I have to give credit where credit is due there, and I have to give credit to Marco Rubio, because not only did he give credit where credit was, not only did he call it out, but he has actually maintained it as a nonpartisan issue in all of the conversations that he has had regarding the election integrity issue. So I got a lot of respect for him was gained because of that from me. And so shout out to Marco Rubio in that regard. So, yeah. But TYT has been silent about this. Now, funny enough, they've had Tim Canova on several times before. They had Tim Canova on with when he was running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because obviously at that point he would have still been a Democrat, and it would have benefited them. But now I will say they also had Tim Canova on when he was running as an independent. Now here's what was interesting. They did not offer to make Tim Canova a Justice Democrat, which is peculiar. They never reached out to him. They never asked him. But if I would, like they for example, reached out to Ro Khanna, who has his own agenda, his own team, and he's in the House, and he represents Silicon Valley on top of that. So why did they not reach out to Tim Canova for him to be a Justice Democrat? Maybe the same reason that they have not said anything about this election. So what I'm going to do is, because we want to make sure that nothing is, since this morning they haven't said anything about it, or at least I want to make sure that since this morning they haven't said anything about it, because I checked this morning and there was nothing there. So we're going to check again. Oh. Of course. Rick Scott whines about non-existent voter fraud. That is what they decide to complain about. So TYT has officially joined the camp of election fraud doesn't exist anymore. It's all a Republican conspiracy. They can happily admit when we have verified, the Georgia race was verifiably rigged. I've never debated that, and I covered it, in this segment, and I will cover it again in future segments, because that's what a journalist with integrity is supposed to do. Now, I've been scrolling last couple of days, and I didn't see TYT cover it at all. And of course, when I finally go to recheck whether or not they covered it, they haven't covered shit. They pretended during 2016 that no election fraud took place. They pretended in 2016 that Jill Stein didn't have lawsuits that affected really, and that exposed really, both the Democrats and the Republicans. And guess what? Those lawsuits are ongoing. Those lawsuits have not concluded, and if they were paying attention to those lawsuits, which they have all the resources to be able to do so, they would know that Jill Stein is actually winning in a lot of those lawsuits. Jimmy Dore fortunately covered Tim Canova's race where the ballots were destroyed, and yet TYT crickets until very later on, maybe last month, they eventually covered Tim Canova again. But let's not be silly. Jimmy Dore is the most popular show on their network. Cool Blue, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Broward County, Fort Lauderdale has carried Democratic in the presidential election since 1992. It may explain partly why Jeb Bush was fine with Brenda Snipes. No offense to Floridians, but what a cesspool. Florida is a very problematic state, to say the least. But no offense given, my friend. No offense given. But the one opportunity that they have to report on this particular issue regarding election fraud in Florida, the one opportunity they could have used to address the video where ballots were being brought in from other precincts. They tried to use Governor Rick Scott as the mouthpiece for how this entire ordeal started up. But, and I'm going to watch that video after I get done with here. And I swear to freaking God, if they don't bring up Tim Canova's name, I'm going to blow a gasket. If they don't bring up the fact that Marco Rubio retweeted this asking for accountability, asking to make sure that every vote was counted, never once bringing up voter fraud, as in never once trying to imply that there were voters who are not registered, there were voters trying to vote under someone else's name that are trying to persuade or sway the outcome of the election. There was no mention of that by Tim Canova, by myself, by anybody involved in the election. Neither was it mentioned by Marco Rubio. Rick Scott took this, tried to weaponize it against the Democrats, and went on a tangent all on his own, and I don't even know where his tangent is coming from. Brenda Snipes found extra ballots. No one said that people committed voter fraud. Not that I've read. I don't remember reading that anywhere. You might have read it somewhere. I have not read that. And even the paper, even the media they misquote the appropriate title for what they are trying to describe oftentimes as election fraud. I don't want to see stories like this fall to the wayside. Stories like this have the morals of these stories co-opted in such a way that it's been discussed. I'm just so tired of having people. I'm so tired of having to counteract these establishment narratives from people who claim to be progressives. And it's depressing to me that TYT would have 4 million subscribers, and at least half of those people, at least half of them, believe the narratives that are coming out of their mouths. At least half of them prefer the main show with Anna Kasparian, the sellout, and Jank to a Jimmy Dore or even a Kyle. At least 2 million people from that channel believe that Jimmy is crazy for wanting accountability, for wanting to build up a third party, for calling out election fraud, for giving candidates who otherwise would have had incredible trouble fundraising until they went on his show. For me, some of you watching right now came from Jimmy Dore's channel. TYT had been known who I was. They knew about all the work I did in North Carolina. They knew that I was the one who discovered what happened with Hillary Victory Fund before they covered it, before Donna Brazile decided to admit to the Hillary Victory Fund. They didn't give me any credit for that, and yet Jimmy Dore is the reason that I got to go on a larger platform and tell my story and tell my perspective on Florida politics and politics in general based off of my experiences as someone on the ground. And yet TYT would rather quote the establishment mainstream media sources. They would rather bring on the Rokanas of the world. They would rather bring on, fake Democrats and fake liberals. And that's not what we're about. I can't stand it. So thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's segment of MCSC on American Freedom Radio. Remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.